Hi, welcome to Monocot and Dicot Weed ID. This is our third time around for lab, and we'd like to continue on. We'll finish up with a few monocots. Hi,
and then move
welcome
on to some
to
dicots
monocot and dicot
and
Weed ID.
a little bit of review in
This
between.
is our third time around
So let's
for
take a
lab,
look at
and
some of those
we'd like to
last
continue on.
monocots.
We'll finish up with a few
Before we do that, though,
monocots,
here's just
and
an
then move on to
example
some
of
dicots,
remembering to
and,
try to identify
a little bit of
weeds
review
at
in
a
between.
early stage.
So
is,
let's take a look
best
at some
because
of
it is
those last
so much
monocots.
easier when they're mature. But by
Before
the
we
time
do
they're
that, though,
mature,
here's just
remember
an
it's
example
too late.
of
Yes,
remembering
you
to
can
try
do
to
preventative
identify
measures the
weeds
next
at
year,
a early
but
stage.
being able to
is,
go out in the
best
field and
because
scout
it is
and ID
so much
those,
easier when they're
weeds,
mature. But by the time
from
they're
a
mature,
early
remember
stage
it's
is
too late.
utmost important.
Yes, you can do preventative
So,
measures
you know,
the next
you've got,
year.
wild
but,
buckwheat
being able to
here,
go out in the
and
field
you've got
and scout
wild sunflower,
and ID those
ragweed,
weeds
stinging
from
nettle,
a early stage
you've
is
got
of
some
utmost
looks like
importance.
water hemp.
So,
And
you know, you've got
definitely
wild buckwheat here,
some
and you've got
amaranth,
wild
over
sunflower,
here, Amaranthaceae,
ragweed,
stinging
so,
nettle.
those are all
You've got
possibilities
some,
that
looks
could
like
be
water
overlooked
hemp,
when they're in
and,
the canopy, underneath the
definitely,
canopy, and may eventually
some,
mature
amaranth
and set seed.
over here,
And then next year
Amaranthaceae.
you have a problem.
So
those are all possibilities.
So
that,
let's
could be
review. We
overlooked
had
when
large
they're in the
crabgrass
canopy,
at the last
underneath
of,
the
the
canopy,
previous
and may
lab,
eventually
and
mature
large
and set
crabgrass,
seed.
remember,
And
has
then
a
next year
fairly
you have a
membranous
ligule. And
So
the
let's
sheath
review.
and,
we had large
lamina
crabgrass at the
are
last
quite
of
hairy.
the previous
And,
lab.
it
and
is
the
fairly
large
prostrate
crabgrass
growing,
remember, has a
very
very
open
membranous
seed head.
ligule.
And here's some
And the
very
sheath
good
and,
examples of
lamina
in the very
are
seedling
quite
stage.
hairy.
And
it is
also
fairly
showing
prostrate
that,
growing.
Remember,
has a very
when it
open
spreads out,
seed
it gets a
head.
little bit larger.
And
You've
here's
got
some,
very good
some
rooting
at the
examples
nose.
of in the very
Or
seedling
rooting
stage,
along the edges
and
of the plant.
also showing
Okay.
that remember when it spreads out, it gets a little bit larger.
And
You've
remember
got,
that the
leaves are
some
flat
rooting
and rough
at
with
the
prominent
nose.
midrib, or rooting along
And,
the edges of
leaf
the sheaths
plant.
are long with stiff
Okay.
hairs. And the flower clusters are fringe-like
And
branches. Remember that leaves are flat and rough with prominent midrib.
Well, let's move on to a
And,
new one now.
leaf
Fall panicum.
sheaths are long
And
with stiff
fall
hairs.
panicum
Is
and the
going to
flower
be a
clusters
pretty,
are
it can
fringe-like
be fairly
branches.
large, and again can root at nodes, can be prostrate for a while.
Let's
and
move
then
on
it
to a
starts
new
to
one
grow
now.
Upright.
Fall panicum.
Usually more upright
And fall
than what you would
panicum
see on crabgrass.
is,
though,
going to be
as
a
you
pretty.
move through the
It can
season.
be fairly
The
large,
stems
and
that
again
usually have a
can
root
reddish
at
purple
nodes,
base.
can be prostrate
And
for a
the,
while, and then it starts to
ligules
grow
are
upright.
hairy.
Usually more
And,
upright than what you would see
if
on
we look at it
crabgrass,
from a
though,
standpoint
as
of
you move
the,
through the
seed
season.
heads,
The stems
or
usually have a
inflorescence,
reddish purple
they're
base.
actually
and
fairly
the,
feathery,
ligules
and
are
open.
hairy. And
The stems,
if we
are
look at it from
hairless,
a standpoint
and
of the
the
sheath
sheath
margins, usually hairless.
or inflorescence.
The other thing that
They're
we notice on
actually,
them is that there's
fairly
a swollen
feathery,
and
node.
open, where those sheaths
stems
attach at the node.
are
It's
hairless,
usually quite
and
swollen.
sheath
And
margins
there's
usually
a
hairless.
prominent mid. The other thing
vein.
that we notice on them is that there's a swollen node, hairy ligule, where those
Also
sheaths attach at
fairly
the
small,
node. It's usually
but,
quite. You will
swollen.
notice it. And there's a
And,
prominent
fall
panicum. Usually has a
vein.
split or V right at the top of the
Hairy
sheath.
ligule,
Also fairly small.
Witchgrass
but, you will
is,
notice it
going to be
and,
divided
fall
up. It
panicum
starts
usually has a
if you
split
split off,
or V.
the
ligule
ligule
right
is
is
going
going
to
to
be
be
hairy.
sheath. To begin with, just showing right here.
Witchgrass
And then if you
is
split
going
off
to be
for, divided up,
witchgrass.
it starts.
You're gonna see
if
blades
you split
or
off.
lamina hairy
The
on the upper
ligule
and lower
is going to
surface.
be hairy.
And then if you split off
begin
from
with,
there,
just showing
the
right
sheaths
here.
are going to be covered
And then
with
if you
long
split
hairs.
off for
and a prominent
witchgrass,
white mid
you're going to
vein
see
in witchgrass.
blades or
Look at
lamina
all those
hairy
on the upper
pubescence
and lower
or
surface.
hairs
And then if you
on,
split
this
off
young,
from there,
particular
the sheaths are going to be
specimen
covered
here.
with long hairs.
And
a prominent
the
white
seed head is
midvein
usually
in witchgrass.
funnel-shaped panicles.
Look at all those pubescence or
they
hairs
can be quite
on,
large,
this young,
4 to 12 inches long and 3 to 12
specimen
inches
here.
wide. And
So
the
you've got
seed head
some
is
real
usually
defining
funnel-shaped
characteristics on
panicles
witchgrass
that you
and,
might not have
they
on
can
a lot
be
of the
quite
other
large,
grass, 4 to 12 inches
that
long and
prominent
3 to 12
midvein,
inches wide,
and the
and,
collar region
so
even has
you've got
hairs on
some
it.
real defining characteristics on
Here's
witchgrass
the sheath
that you might
with,
not have on
hairs
a
on
lot
it.
of the other grasses. So that prominent
Moving
midvein
on to
and,
foxtail barley.
The collar region even
Foxtail
has
barley
hairs on it.
is going to be, again,
Here's
if you
the
look at
sheath
ligule
with,
membranous,
hairs on it.
whereas the ligule was hairy with witchgrass, now you've
Moving
got a
on
ligule
to
that's
foxtail
membranous.
barley, Oracle
Foxtail
absence
barley is going to be, again,
mostly
if you look at
issue
ligule
here.
membranous,
And
whereas the
then
ligule
if
was
you look
hairy
at
with
the
witchgrass,
long, narrow leaf
now you've got a
blades or
ligule that's
lamina,
membranous.
Oracle
and,
absence.
then you have short scaly
rhizomes,
mostly
and
issue
then
here.
it branches off.
And
to
then if you look
no
at the
rhizomes
long narrow
and
leaf
blades
blade with
or
pronounced
lamina,
ridges on upper
and
surface.
then you have
So
short,
the-
scaly
the,
rhizomes.
If you looked at it up
And,
closely, you're going to
then
see
it branches
ridges
off
on the
to
upper surface,
no rhizomes,
and
very
blade with
distinct
pronounced ridges
seed
on
head,
upper
surface.
being broadest at the
So
middle.
and
If you looked
usually
at it
kind of
up
a
closely, you're
purplish
going to
tint
see
to it.
ridges
So,
on the upper surface.
and
Ligules
very
are
distinct
actually
seed
membranous,
head, if you look at this,
being broadest at
So,
the middle,
and
very
usually
distinctive
kind of
again.
a purplish.
A lot of
tint
times
to it.
have purplish tint
So,
to the stems
also.
Ligules are actually
Italian
membranous.
ryegrass,
If you look
if
at
we
this.
look at that,
So,
starting out with auricles
very
present,
distinctive again.
then you go
A lot of
to
times
short
have
claw-like
purplish tint to the
auricles,
stems also.
and then no rhizomes and prominent leaf
Italian
veins.
ryegrass.
So very prominent
If we
on
look at
Italian
that,
ryegrass,
starting out with
and
auricles
it has quite a
present,
compact.
then you go
spikelet,
to short
and
claw-like
the
auricles,
auricles
are quite
and then no
large.
rhizomes.
In this
and
case, they're
prominent
not clasping,
leaf
but
veins.
quite
So
large.
very prominent on
And,
Italian ryegrass.
You can see on the
and it
close-up
has a
really
really prominent
compact
vein.
spikelet.
And,
the auricles
upper
are
surface
quite,
is
dull,
large. In this
and
case,
the
they're
lower
not
surface is
clasping, but
glossy.
quite large. And you can see on the close-up really
With
prominent
goosegrass,
veins. We have some really long hairs on
upper surface
goosegrass,
is dull,
and
and the lower surface
some
is
very
glossy.
long lamina, very prostrate in
With
early
goosegrass,
stages. We have some
can
really
become a
long
little bit more
hairs
upright,
on
but,
goosegrass.
it also
has a
some very long
distinctive
lamina,
seed
very
head with
prostrate,
inflorescence
enclosed with
early
2 to
stages.
13
It
spikes
can become a little bit
in
more
finger-like
upright,
clusters.
but it also has
And,
a
usually
very
the stems do
distinctive
stay
seed
prostrate
head
to
with
occasionally erect,
inflorescence
depending on the
and
growing
closed with
condition.
2 to 13 spikes.
And then the hairs,
finger-like
lots of them
clusters.
at the collar,
and
along the leaf,
usually the stems
sheath,
do stay
and
prostrate
along
to
the,
occasionally erect,
lamina.
depending on the growing condition.
And if you look over here,
and then the hairs,
we would start out
lots of
with
them
ligule
at
membranous,
the collar,
and
oracles
along the
absent,
leaf sheath,
and
then
along
if
the,
you branch off from
lamina.
there, you've got
And if you
long
look over
narrow
here,
leaf blades.
and then
We would
you look
start
at a
out
flat
with ligule
stem,
membranous,
with sheaths
oracles
white
absent
at the base. And
Okay.
then if you branch
look at
off
the
from
sheath
there,
down here, they're
you've
going
got
to be
long, narrow leaf
white
blades
at the base.
And then
We
you
can't
look at
really
a
see
flat
good sheath
stem
here, unfortunately,
with
unless
sheaths
we try
white
to look down
at the
here,
base.
and nothing's clear
Okay.
enough in that photograph.
If you
Sorry.
look at the sheath down here, they're going to be
Woolly
white at the
cupgrass.
base.
We can't really.
We start
see a
out
good
with
sheath
ligule
here,
is hairy,
unfortunately, unless
and
we try to look
then
down
if we
here, and
branch off
nothing's
from
clear
there,
enough in
the
that
lamina
photograph.
has
Sorry.
many hairs, and then the lamina is hairy on upper
Woolly
and lower
cupgrass.
surface.
We
And,
start out with
then
ligule
the
is hairy.
lamina sheaths are
And,
covered with very
then
short,
if we
dense
branch
hairs.
off from there,
One
the
leaf
lamina
margin
has
usually
many
crinkled.
hairs.
And then the
if you
lamina
look
is hairy
down
on
here,
upper
there's
and
a,
lower
crinkled
surface,
margin along
and
the leaf.
then the
lamina
then you have
sheaths are covered with
enlarged,
very short,
nodes.
dense hairs.
One leaf
And,
margin usually
You
crinkled.
have rounded stems.
And if you look down here,
and
there's
fine
a
pubescence.
crinkled margin
Ligule is
along
hairy
the
and
leaf.
short, like we
And
suggested before.
then you have enlarged
Then you have,
nodes. Woolly cupgrass seed head
And,
is
you
going
have
to
rounded
be composed of
stems.
several branches.
and fine
Or,
pubescence.
rachis.
Ligule is hairy and short, like we suggested
There's a
before.
small seedling.
And you
that's
have
very difficult
woolly
to tell, a
cupgrass
little bit,
seed head is
going to be
blurry.
composed of
Sorry.
several branches or rachis. Downy brome
There's
can be a pest in
small
worked
seedling that's
areas
very difficult
and
to tell, a little
usually
bit,
can have some very dense
blurry.
germination in the
Sorry.
fall. This is early summer or
Downy
winter annual.
brome.
Most
Can
of
be
the
a
time
pest
I've seen
in,
it as a winter
worked
annual,
areas,
and
it'll get
usually
about a
can
foot and a
have some
half to
very
2 feet
dense
tall.
germination in the fall.
Both
This
the
is
lamina
early
and the
summer
sheaths are
or
densely
winter
covered with
annual.
soft hairs.
Most of the
and they
time
have
I've seen
a
it as a
distinctive
winter
twist,
annual, and it'll get
and
usually
if you
about
look at the
a foot and a
ligules,
half
they're
to 2 feet
membranous.
tall. Both
And,
the lamina
usually
and the sheaths
toothed or
are densely
fringed
covered
with
with
hair.
soft hairs,
And you
and
can
they have
see
a
that
distinctive
in,
twist over here.
and if
you've
you
got
look
a
at the
ligules,
ligules, they're
ligule.
membranous.
It doesn't show too much
And
as far as
usually
toothed or
hairiness,
fringed with hair
on the fringe.
And you can
but,
see that
a lot of
in,
times they are. You can
over
see a
here,
little bit.
you've got a
here.
membranous ligule,
And
doesn't
then
show too much.
If you look at the
as
sheath,
far as
right
hairiness, where it starts out
on
at
the
between
fringe,
the lamina
but,
and where the
a
sheath
lot of
starts
times
is usually
they
kind
are.
of a
You can see
V-neck
a little bit here.
type of split.
And
right
then
at the top of the
if you look
sheath.
at the sheath,
And
very
right
fine
where it
hairs.
starts out at between the lamina and
These
where
are
the sheath
clump
starts
forming,
is usually
but
kind
do
of a
have
V-neck,
lots of tillers,
as you might
type of,
expect on a
split
bunch grass,
right
at the top of the sheath, and very fine hairs. Now, there's a little bit of differences in the
clump
literature,
forming, but do
on
have lots of
what we
tillers,
have seen
as you might
is
expect
the
on a bunch
differences
grass.
between different types of brome-like grasses. And
Now,
this is
there's a little
bit of
probably
differences
as
in the literature
accurate
as I've seen
on,
for downy
what
brome
we have
right
seen
here. And if you notice,
is, the differences
these will
between
come off
different
and
types
stick
of
in your
brome
socks
like,
when
when
you're
you're
walking
walking
through downy
and,
brome. This is
And, so that's
probably
one
as
of the
accurate as
biggest
I've
pest
seen
problems
for
of
downy
this
brome
grass
right
is if you
here.
get
And if you
into,
notice,
these
these will
in the,
come off and stick in your
early
socks
spring to late
when you're
spring
walking
when it
through
matures.
downy brome. These will
And,
come off,
so
in
that's one of
everything,
the
and even,
biggest
pest
your
problems
boots
of this
and,
grass
your
is
pant
if you
legs.
get into
And then,
this in the
Japanese brome
early spring
is
to
more
late
like
spring
the,
when it
typical
matures,
brome, and then
these will
cheatgrass,
come off,
which
in
some say is
everything,
downy
and even,
brome, but
stick to your boots, and
there's
your
places
pant
all
legs.
over that show cheatgrass
And then,
the same as downy
Japanese
brome. So there
brome
where we've got a
is
problem
more like
between
the typical
scientific
brome and then
names
cheatgrass,
and common names,
which some say is downy brome, but smooth brome
There's
grass
places all
is
over
going
that
to
show
be
cheatgrass
typical
the same
of
as
many
downy
pastures.
brome. So there where we've
And
got
while
a problem
we use it for
between
forage quite a
scientific
bit,
names
and
the
common
names.
one of the problems is that it can be
Smooth
very
brome
rhizomatous,
grass
is
and
going to
it
be
can
actually
typical
spread
of
and
many
become
pastures.
a weed.
And,
And while we use it for
areas where
forage
you don't
quite a
want
bit,
the
blades are quite
one of the
flat
problems
and
is that
smooth,
it can
but
be
have very
very
rhizomatous,
little
and
tiny
it
roughness
can
to the
actually
margins
spread
on
and
the,
become a weed.
leaf
in
laminas,
areas
and the
where you don't want it.
distinctive part is that
The blades are
you're
quite
gonna have
flat
that and
W
smooth,
shape,
but have rough
that
margins,
is almost
little
always
tiny
a
roughness
watermark.
to the
Not
margins
always,
on the,
but almost always.
leaf
that you
laminas.
see in the
And the
midpoint of
distinctive
the,
part is that
lamina.
you're going to have
And then
that
also, just like
W
what you
shape,
saw in
that is
downy
almost
brome,
always a watermark.
on smooth
Not always,
brome,
but you
almost
also have
always,
that
V
that you see in the
neck
midpoint of
right
the,
at the tip of the sheath.
lamina. So
and
that's
then
pretty
also,
distinctive.
just like what you saw,
And then
in,
there are no
downy
oracles
brome,
present at all.
On
And
smooth
it has a
brome,
rounded
you also have
ligule,
that V,
which is
kind of
neck
hard to see
right at
on
the
this
tip of the
particular
sheath.
photograph, but it is
So that's pretty
rounded
distinctive.
ligule. And then there are no oracles present at all. Annual
And
bluegrass
it has a round
is
edged ligule,
not going to be a
which is
really
kinda
big
hard to
weed
see
that you see
on this particular
in
photograph, but it
many
is,
areas,
rounded
except quite
ligule.
disturbed. But sometimes it'll be in gardens and
Annual
backyards
bluegrass
more often
is
than not going to
it's
be
bright
a really
green,
big
and it's
weed
usually
that you
greener
see
than your lawn.
In,
You're showing
many
some
areas
bright green
except quite
patches of
disturbed,
annual bluegrass,
but sometimes
and,
it'll be
the
in
leaves are
gardens
smooth
and
with a
backyards more
boat-shaped
often
tip
than
on
not.
it.
So here's
It's
the
bright
boat-shaped
green,
leaf
and
tip.
it's usually
No
greener
auricles
than your
at all.
lawn. Here's
Folded
showing some bright green
venation,
patches of annual
long
bluegrass,
membranous ligule,
and the leaves
Okay,
are
there's the
smooth
long
with a
membranous ligule.
boat-shaped tip on them.
And
So here's the
boat-shaped
usually
leaf
a
tip.
bunch-type
No
growth.
auricles
It
at
is
all.
an annual, of course.
Folded
And
venation,
cool season
grass
long
that
membranous
tends to
ligule.
die out
Okay,
as the
there's
weather
the
gets
long membranous
warmer
ligule.
and drier.
And
It does have a little
usually
feathery
a
tufted
bunch-type growth.
seed head.
It is an annual, of course, and cool season
And then I
grass
thought
that
you'd
tends
like
to
this
cartoon.
die out as the
I may
weather
have
gets
showed it before, can't
warmer
remember,
and
but,
drier.
I
It
like
does have a
those.
little feathery tufted seed head. Let's move on to some broadleaf seedling
And then I thought you'd like
identification.
this,
and just
cartoon.
as a quick
I may
review,
have showed it before, can't
remember
remember,
an
but, I
ochrea,
like
present
those.
or not, is a part of broadleaf.
Let's move on
weed
to some
identification. You don't have any
broadleaf
ochreas
seedling
in
identification.
grasses. And just as a
And
quick
then you've got
review,
palmate or
remember
pinnate
an
venation.
ochrea,
Both,
present or
are
not, is
types of
a
net
part
venation,
of
typical
broadleaf
weed
dicots.
identification. You don't have any
And
ochreas
then
in
you can
grasses.
have lobing or
And
smooth.
then you've got palmate or
margins.
pinnate
You're gonna
venation.
have a mid vein,
Both
just like you
are
could in
types of net
grasses.
venation.
Maybe
Typical
you
of
won't, maybe
broadleaf
you will, but it
dicots.
can be present.
And
And
then
you
you're
can
gonna
have
a
lobing
true
or
petiole
smooth
and,
margins.
and
You're
you're
gonna
going to
have a
recognizable
mid-vein, just like you
cotyledon,
could in
and then
grasses.
below the cotyledonary
maybe
node,
you
there's
won't,
going to
maybe
be
you
a
will, but it
hypocotyl.
can be present.
And then
And,
below that, of
you're
course,
gonna
is
have
gonna be
a
the radicle
true
or
petiole.
root.
And we
an
do
easily
look quite a bit
recognizable
at
cotyledon,
what the leaf
and then
arrangement
below
is
the
going to be, whether it be
cotyledonary node, there's
opposite
going to be
or
a hypocotyl.
alternate. So
And then
alternate
below that,
is
of course,
going
is
to
gonna be
show
the
up,
radicle
and
or
opposite
root.
are typically going to show up.
And
And we
after
do
the
look quite a
cotyledonary
bit at
node,
what the leaf
and remember,
arrangement
we
is
do
going to
have
be,
some
whether it
basic
be
shapes
opposite
that we
or
look
alternate.
at. For
Broadleaf
so
seedling
alternate is going to
identification
show
from
up
butterfly
and opposite
to a
are
less
typically gonna
pronounced
show up
kidney
after
to
the
a
cotyledonary
round,
node,
or
and
sometimes
remember we do
tapered
have
tip,
some
which I would
basic
call
shapes
cordate
that we
or
look at.
heart-shaped.
For
Then
broadleaf
spatulate
seedling
to
identification
oval,
from butterfly
ovate
to a less
and
pronounced
lanceolate
kidney
lanceolate
to a
or
round
linear.
or sometimes tapered tip, which I would call
And
cordate or
here's some
heart-shaped.
a
And then
key. This is,
spatulate
I believe,
to
from the
oval,
University of Minnesota.
ovate,
That's
and
quite clear
lanceolate,
in
lanceolate,
showing the different
or
branching
linear.
off of linear cotyledons, first of all.
And
here's
first
some
true leaves alternate
a
or
key.
first
This
true
is,
leaves
I believe,
opposite.
from the University of Minnesota.
And,
That's fairly
quite
clear
easy to
in showing
move
the
through
different
and find
branching off
these
of
in the
linear
seedling
cotyledons,
stage,
first of all,
depending on
and
first
how,
true leaves
whether
alternate
there's
or
an
first true
ochrea
leaves
present
opposite.
after first true leaves
And,
are alternate. Fairly easy
no
to
unpleasant
move
odor
through
or
and
an
find
unpleasant odor.
these
Ochrea
in the
is
seedling
present only in
stage,
Pennsylvania
depending on
smartweed,
and
how,
whether there's an
in
ochrea
wild
present
buckwheat.
after first true leaves are
And then,
alternate. If you look at
no
first true leaves
unpleasant odor
opposite,
or an
if
unpleasant
they're
odor,
true leaves
ochrea
are
is
linear,
present
it's
only
going
in
to be
Pennsylvania
kochia or
smartweed
fireweed,
and,
kochia or fireweed.
in wild
And
buckwheat.
the leaves are very
And then,
hairy there, whereas
if
the
you look
true
at
leaves
first
are
true
linear
leaves
and
opposite,
not hairy.
if their
in Russian thistle.
true leaves are linear,
So
it's going to
then
be
remember
kochia or
the other
fireweed,
thing is
kochia
that
or
these
fireweed,
leaf arrangements,
and
or I'm
the
sorry,
leaves
the
are very hairy there, whereas the
cotyledon
true leaves
shape
are linear
has
and
nothing to
not
do
hairy in
with
Russian
the
thistle.
family, because
So
you can
then
have some
remember
very different families
the other
here
thing
that
is
have the
that
same,
these leaf
arrangements,
cotyledon
or I'm
shape
sorry,
and,
the
even true leaf,
cotyledon
somewhat
shape
similar shape.
has nothing to do with the family, because
And then you can
you
go
can have
off
some
into
very different
ovate
families here
cotyledons,
that have the same,
where you've got first true
leaf
leaves
cotyledon
opposite from
shape
one another,
and even
and
true leaf,
somewhat
true
similar
leaves
shape.
that are sparsely hairy and oval, or true
And then you
leaves
can
that are
go off
densely
into
hairy with
ovate
pointed
cotyledons,
tips. where
And
you've got
then
first
you
true
can go
leaves
to,
opposite
first
from one
true leaves
another,
alternate.
and
Sparsely
true
hairy
leaves that are
or
sparsely
densely
hairy
again.
and oval,
And these are the two
or
nightshades.
true leaves that are densely hairy with
round
pointed
cotyledons,
tips. Field
and then
pennycress,
you can go to
typical
first true leaves
weed that we see
alternate.
around here,
First true
sparsely
leaves
hairy
opposite
or
first
densely
true leaves
hairy
alternate.
again.
After
And
finding
these are
a
the two
round
nightshades.
cotyledon.
Round cotyledons, field pennycress,
And then we can move on to
typical
spatulate or oblong
weed that we see
cotyledons
around
with
here,
ragweed,
first true leaves
and then
opposite,
heart
first true
or
leaves
kidney
alternate,
shaped
after
cotyledons
finding
with
a
velvet
round
leaf
leaf
or
or
wild
wild mustard.
And then we can move on to
here's just
spatulate or oblong
typical,
cotyledons with
another
ragweed,
key that shows
and
pretty
then
much
heart
the same
or
thing.
kidney-shaped cotyledons.
And then
with
I
velvet
branched
leaf
it
or
off,
wild
so to
mustard.
speak, into linear cotyledons that we now
And
have
then here's
narrowed
just
down
a,
to
typical,
four
another
different
key
that shows pretty much the same
possibilities.
thing. The unpleasant
And then
odor,
I branched it
or
off, so to
not
speak,
a unpleasant
into
odor,
linear cotyledons
that we
so
now have it
then we
narrowed
have
down
first true
to
leaves lobed or
four
first true leaves
different
not lobed.
possibilities. The unpleasant
if you
odor
look at linear
or
cotyledons,
not a unpleasant odor.
moving further down,
First
so
true leaves alternate.
then we have first true leaves
now
lobed
we've got
or
first true leaves
not
opposite.
lobed. And so then you've got your
Then if you
typical
look at
issue
linear
or,
cotyledons,
potentials there.
Moving further down, first true leaves alternate.
And then if you
Now
want a
we've got
breakdown
first
of
true
leaf
leaves
arrangement,
opposite.
whether it be alternate
And,
or
so then
whorled,
you've got your
a very
typical
long list
issue
or
or
the
leaves opposite.
potentials there.
Again, these would be for the true leaves. Quite a long
And
list
then if
too.
you want a
But
breakdown
these are
of
ways
leaf
of
arrangement,
defining
whether it be
the different,
alternate or
uh,
whorled, a very
um,
long list.
areas
and the
or
leaves
the different
opposite.
options.
Again,
within
these would be
broadleaf
for the
weeds.
true leaves.
Quite a
So
long
we're going to
list too.
break up
But
our
these are
broadleaf
ways
weeds
of
into
defining
summer annuals,
the
fall or
different,
winter
uh,
annuals, and
uh,
summer
areas
annuals,
or the different
fall or winter
options
annuals,
within broadleaf
and then
weeds.
going on into biennials. And
So
then
we're going to
eventually
break up our
perennials.
broadleaf
Okay.
weeds into summer annuals, fall or winter annuals, and
Remember that
summer
with,
annuals,
annuals, they
fall or winter
typically- the
annuals,
summer annuals
and then
will
going on
germinate
into
in the spring,
biennials, and then
they'll grow all
eventually
summer,
perennials,
and
Okay.
will die with the first hard freeze in the fall. Remember that with
Here's
annuals, they
a
typically,
very
the summer
common
annuals will germinate
weed,
in the
chickweed,
spring.
that
They'll
can be
grow
a
all
major
summer,
problem, typically
and,
in more
will
fertile
die with
areas,
the first
fertile
hard
soils
freeze in
where
the
you've
fall.
got plenty of moisture. It is in a
Here's a
somewhat rare
very
family,
common
the
weed,
Caryophyllaceae
chickweed,
family,
that can be
and it
a
is
major
related
problem,
to another
typically in
really
more
bad
fertile
weed,
areas,
white
fertile
cockle,
soils
which is
where
my
you got
worst
plenty
weed
of
out in the
moisture.
strawberry field.
It is in a
so
somewhat rare
the lower
family,
stems
the
are
Caryophyllaceae
family,
and often
and it is
rooting
related
at the
to
nodes,
another
which makes
really
it
bad
very,
weed,
very
white
hard
cockle,
to pull
which
these
is
out.
my worst
They've
weed
got
out in the strawberry field.
little stems that'll break
so
off in a plant
the
like
lower
this
stems
can have
are
multiple
decumbent
branching everywhere,
and often
So,
rooting at the
and that's
nodes,
kinda
which
like
makes
what
it
we see
very,
with white
very
cockle,
hard
too.
to pull these
And,
out.
they've got
then you
uh,
can see
little
lower stems
stems
that are
that'll break
hairless,
off,
upper
and a
stems
plant like
gonna
this
have a
can have
distinctive row or
multiple
two of
branching
fine
everywhere.
hairs. So
And then,
and that's
flowers
kinda
are
like what we
gonna
see with white
be
cockle,
eventually
too.
turning into
And,
capsules.
Then you can
And these
see
oval
lower
capsules
stems are
split
hairless,
into
upper
6
stems
sections.
going to have a distinctive row or two of fine hairs.
So,
very
and then,
common weed
flowers
in
are
fertile,
going to
moist
be
soil.
eventually turning into capsules.
Here's
And these
a
oval
unique
capsules
one.
are
This
split
is
into 6 sections.
related for some of you that know horticulture a little
So,
bit better.
very
One of the
common
most,
weed in fertile,
interesting
moist soil.
flowers, very showy annual flower is
Here's a
unique
portulaca
one. This
or
is
moss rose.
related
And,
for
so
some of
these-
you that
that
know
is in the
horticulture
same
a little
family
bit
as
better.
common
One of the
purslane,
most
the Portulaceae.
interesting
Portulaceae.
flowers, very showy
Okay.
annual flower is
Portulaca,
and, these
or
are a very
moss rose.
fleshy leaf,
And
so
and,
that is
this
in the
is a
same
very good
family as
picture of the
common
young
purslane.
seedling, the Portulaceae.
The cotyledons are
Portulaceae.
fairly
Okay.
linear to oblong, and
And,
these are a
smooth
very
leaves.
fleshy leaf.
They're typically
and,
quite
This
rounded.
is a very good picture of the young
opposite
seedling.
The
stems
cotyledons
and,
are
very
fairly
fleshy and
linear
prostrate
to
and
oblong,
reddish.
and
Smooth
believe me,
leaves.
this is
They're
a
typically
warm
quite
season
rounded,
broadleaf like no
opposite
other, and it's
the,
extremely
stems,
drought tolerant and very
if you wanna
fleshy
kill
and prostrate
this,
and
having such
reddish.
fleshy leaves,
and
you have to
believe
pull
me,
it out
this,
and turn it
is
upside
a
down
warm
to
season
actually kill it, or
broadleaf
it'll rip
like
right
no
back
other.
in.
And it's
The
extremely
flowers are
drought
going to
tolerant.
have 5 yellow petals.
If you want to kill
They're
this,
small,
have
having
numerous
such
seeds,
fleshy leaves, you
and,
have to pull it out and turn
typically,
it upside down to actually kill
plants
it.
can
or it'll
establish
rip
from a
right
stem
back in.
piece. So if you're using
flowers
any
are
kind
gonna
of
have
a
5 yellow
cultivator
petals.
that breaks
They're
this
small,
have
and
numerous
chops
seeds,
up that plant,
and
you can be actually
typically,
propagating it more than anything else.
Plants can establish from a stem piece. So if you're using any kind of a
Then we
cultivator
move on
that breaks
to
this
wild mustard
and chops
in
up
the,
that plant,
you can be
Brassicaceae, in
actually
other words, what used to
propagating
be
it
the
more than anything
cruciferae
else.
family, where they have a cruciform flower. Or
Then we
cross
move on
shape,
to wild
and
mustard.
yellow mustard
in the
is,
Brassicaceae,
also known
in other
as
words, what
wild
used to be the
mustard,
cruciferae
and,
family.
it does
where
have,
they have
a
really
cruciform
some
flower,
interesting
characteristics, as do all the mustard
yellow
family.
mustard.
This is very
is,
easy to
also known
as wild mustard,
really identify
and
in
it
the
does
seedling
have
stage.
really
Got a lot
some,
of
interesting
unique
characteristics,
leaf on it,
as do all the
and,
mustard family.
the leaves
this
are-
is
or the
very
plants are gonna
easy
be 1 to
to
3 feet high.
really
The leaves are gonna be
identify
hairy,
in the
arranged
seedling
alternately.
stage. Got a lot of
And they're gonna have
tooth
unique
margins
leaf on
it.
Okay.
And the leaves
And
or
the
the
plants
plants
are gonna be 1 to
being
3
in the
feet
same
high.
family. They're
The
going
leaves are
to
gonna be
resemble
hairy,
radish, arranged
leaves.
alternately,
Okay.
and they're going to have toothed margins. Okay.
Now, most of you
And
probably
the,
hasn't
of
seen
course,
this
being in the
particular
same family, they're gonna
unusual
resemble radish
plant, but
leaves.
unfortunately, it's
Okay.
one of those that you find in drier, hotter climates. Like
Now,
my
most of you probably
hometown in
hasn't
Mitchell,
seen
South
this
Dakota,
particular
as you go further west,
unusual,
where we got
plant,
half the
but
amount of rainfall.
unfortunately,
It's
it's
one of those
and
that you
hotter
find in
conditions,
drier, hotter
this
climates.
puncture vine,
like
you will find all the way down
into
town of Mitchell, South
Texas.
Dakota.
But
As you go
you
further
will
west,
notice it
where
even
we
in
got half
drier
the amount
areas
of
of Canada.
rainfall of here.
So
and hotter
it is
conditions.
a
This
very
puncture
prostrate
vine,
growing,
you will find all the way
and,
down into
very easily
identifiable
Texas,
first
but you
true
will
leaves.
notice it even
It's,
in drier areas of Canada.
Definitely has a unique
So,
flower on it.
It
It's in
is
the
a
Zygophyllaceae
very
family.
prostrate growing.
And believe me,
and,
these
very easily
are
identifiable
really
first
apt-to-name
true
puncture
leaves.
vine,
It's,
because these seeds
are
definitely has a
huge,
unique
and
flower
I
on
can
it. It's in
remember,
the Zygophyllaceae
getting in with
family.
my bicycle
And believe
when
me,
I was a kid
these
running
are
around on my
really
bicycle,
apt to
and
name
these would
puncture
easily
vine
puncture
because
bicycle
these seeds
tires.
are
So,
huge. And I
nasty,
can remember
vine when those
getting
get
in
mature.
with my bicycle when I was a kid running around.
Now we move on
my
into the
bicycle, and
Asteraceae
these would
family,
easily
and these
puncture
are
bicycle
interesting
tires.
because the
So,
plant and the
nasty vine when those get
inflorescence
mature.
doesn't really look like a normal Asteraceae.
Now we move on into the
Asteraceae family,
And
these
so
are interesting
the
because
plant
the
is
plant
got a
and
very
the,
unique, widely
inflorescence
branched,
doesn't really look like a
annual and
normal
very unique feathery
Asteraceae
leaves.
or Compositae family.
They're going to have a lot
And
of
so
the
indentations,
plant is
it's
got
not
a
a very
compound
unique,
leaf, but
widely
definitely has
branched,
some very feathery
annual and
very
unique
deep
feathery
segments.
leaves.
And
You're
of
going to
course,
have a
this is
lot
going to
of
produce
allergies for
indentations.
many of us
It's
that are
not a compound
that,
leaf,
uh,
but
are allergic
definitely
to it.
has some very
Here's
feathery
what it looks like even
to
in
it.
the seedling
Very
stage,
deep
quite
cut
rounded
segments,
and
cotyledons, and even
of
the
course
first
this
true
is going to
leaves
produce
being
allergies
opposite
for
are going to
many
be,
of us that are
already
that
have some
are allergic to
major
it.
indentations.
Here's what
in
it looks like even in the seedling stage, quite rounded cotyledons.
These
and even
could
the first
get
true leaves being
upwards of
opposite
3.5
going
to
to
4
be,
feet tall
already.
And usually in
have
August
some
is when they
major
start releasing their
indentations
pollen,
in
which
it.
causes so many of us so many problems. These can get
then we
upwards of
can even
3.5
have
to
more
4 feet
problems
tall,
with giant
and usually
ragweed.
in August is when
And
they start
believe me,
releasing
these
their
can
pollen,
get
which
8 to
causes
10
so many
feet
of us
tall
so
or
many
more.
They have
problems.
rough and coarse stems. They
Then we
leaves are going to
can
be
even have
typically
more
quite
problems
hairy
with giant
and
ragweed.
opposite leaf
And
arrangement.
believe me, these can get
And,
8 to 10
they
feet tall or
definitely,
more.
can
They have
produce a
rough
lot
and
of
coarse
pollen that
stems.
cause the allergic
The
reaction.
leaves
are going to be typically quite
male or
hairy,
staminate flower
and,
heads are in
opposite
long
leaf
spikes.
arrangement. And,
the
they
pistillate
definitely
flowers
can
are going to
produce
be
a lot of
a little
pollen
bit,
that cause the
different
allergic
usually
reaction again.
at the leaf bases.
Male
Again,
or
blooms
staminate
in
flower
late
heads
July
are
and
in long
August.
spikes, and the pistillate flowers are going to be
Still in the
a little bit,
Asteraceae family,
different,
but
usually
resembling
at
a
the
little bit
leaf
more
bases.
with
And again,
typical
blooms in late July
Asteraceae
and August.
family.
It common cocklebur looks like somewhat
Still in
like
the
a
Asteraceae
seedling
family,
sunflower,
but resembling
and,
a little
it is
bit
in the
more
Asteraceae
with
family, which
typical
was,
Asteraceae
at least,
family.
it
originally
common
compositae,
cocklebur looks
widely
like
branched
somewhat
annual,
like a seedling
usually stems
sunflower,
slightly zigzag and bushy,
it is in the
up to about 4
Asteraceae
feet
family,
tall,
which
but
was,
very widely branched.
at least
and
originally compositae.
usually have some
widely
purple,
branched annual,
spotting,
usually
in
stems
places
slightly
on the
zigzag
plant,
and bushy, up to about 4 feet tall, but very
male
widely
flowers,
branched.
staminate flowers are born in a
And,
terminal cluster, and female
usually
pistil
have
flowers
some
occur at the
purple
leaf bases,
spotting,
kind of just like
in
what we
places
saw
on
with
the
giant
plant.
ragweed, right?
And
Male
here's
flowers,
the
staminate flowers are
cockleburs
born
that,
in a terminal
of course,
cluster,
can
and
stick
female
very
pistil flowers
easily
occur
onto
at the
your
leaf bases,
pant legs
kind
or
of
your
just like what
socks.
we saw with
So,
giant ragweed, right?
The stems are going to be rough with dark
And
purple
here's
spots,
the
like we said.
cockleburs
And
that, of course,
sandpaper
can
like
stick
almost
very
in
easily
texture,
onto your
and,
pant legs or your
cotyledons are
socks.
lanceolate
So
and thick. The
leaves
stems
are
are going to be rough
triangular
with
shaped
dark purple
in
spots,
general.
like we said, and sandpaper-like almost in texture. And
Then,
cotyledons
if you
are
compare
lanceolate
sunflowers, still
and
in the
thick.
Asteraceae family,
Leaves are
look at how
triangular
closely
shaped
that
in general.
seedling right here looks like the sunflower seedling. And again,
Then,
just like
if
what
you
you
compare
saw
sunflowers,
before,
still in the
the
Asteraceae
leaves
family,
are fairly
look at how
triangulate.
closely that seed,
Just like you had
seedling
in more
right here,
broad
looks
triangular
like the
with
sunflower
common
seedling.
cocklebur,
but a
and
little bit
again,
narrower,
just like what you
triangular
saw
with the regular
before,
common
the
sunflower.
leaves are fairly
And,
triangulate.
Again, very
Just like
coarse
you had
branching,
more
lots
broad
of variability
triangular
in wild
with common
sunflowers and how
cocklebur,
upright
but
or
a
how
little bit
branched
narrower
they are.
triangular with
and
the regular
some of that
common
has to do with
sunflower.
their growing location,
And,
but a lot of genetic
again, very
variation that we
coarse
see in
branching,
sunflowers.
lots of
Leaves are gonna be
variability in wild
alternate
sunflowers
and
and
up
how
to
upright
12
or how
inches
branched
long
they are,
and have
and some of that has to do with their growing
Okay.
location, but
A lot of
see it
genetic
very
variation
easily here
that we
because I
see
don't
in
have a
sunflowers.
up close.
Leaves are
on
gonna
a,
be
alternate,
a
and
mature
up
leaf,
to 12
but,
inches
I
long.
think enough of you have
and
seen
have
wild
sawtooth
sunflower to
margins.
probably remember
Okay.
that.
Can't
And,
see it very easily here because I don't have a
typical
up close
Asteraceae
flower with ray
mature
and
leaf,
disc florets.
but I think
whereas
enough of you have seen
the
wild
other
sunflower
Asteraceae
to
here,
probably
probably
remember
remember that,
and the giant
and,
ragweed are going to have
the
separate
typical
male and female flowers,
Asteraceae
whereas
flower
it's
with
all
ray and disc
one
florets,
in,
whereas
sunflower.
in the other Asteraceae
the
here,
ray
the
florets
cocklebur
are going
and
to
the giant
be,
ragweed
around
are
the
gonna
edge
have
with
separate
the
showy part
male
are
and
gonna be
female
flowers,
and
whereas
typically
the
it's all
disc florets
one
in the interior
sunflower.
of the flower are
So
going to have
the ray florets
both male
are
and
going to
female
be
parts.
around the edge, with the showy part are going to be female, and typically the disc florets in the
Moving on to a
interior
different
of the
family,
flower
the
are going to
Polygonaceae
have,
family,
both
which
male
of
and
course
female parts.
rhubarb is found in, but in this case we're looking at wild buckwheat.
And wild buckwheat is a very common
Moving
weed
on to a
and
different
can grow
family,
quite aggressively.
the
If it's got the
Polygonaceae
right
family, which
location,
of course
it's
rhubarb
a
is
slender
found in,
creeping
but
stem
in this
that
case we're
will-
looking at
has the
wild
ability to
buckwheat.
twine around just
And
about
the
anything.
wild buckwheat is a
And
very
it's got
common weed
distinctive,
and can grow
flower
quite
heads.
aggressively.
The leaves
if
are
it's
going to
got
be
the right
heart-shaped,
location.
and
It's a slender,
gonna have
creeping
pointed
stem
tips.
that will
Flowers
has the
are going to be
ability to
greenish
twine
white
around just about anything,
and quite small
and
and
it's got
inconspicuous.
distinctive
And the
flower
seeds
heads.
are going to be
The leaves
three-sided.
are going to be heart-shaped, and they're going to have pointed tips. Flowers are going to be greenish white.
Another
and,
weed that
quite
looks
small
quite
and
different
inconspicuous.
than
And the seeds are
the
going to be
wild
three-sided.
buckwheat, but is still in the same Polygonaceae family, is Pennsylvania smartweed. And if you
Another
recall from our
weed that
discussions
looks
earlier
quite
on,
different than
these
the
seeds are
wild
quite similar,
buckwheat, but
in,
is still in
the
the same
smartweed.
Polygonaceae
But here you've got a
family, is
real
Pennsylvania
prominent
smartweed.
ochrea.
And if you
in
recall from our
Pennsylvania
discussions
smartweed.
earlier on,
They can get 2 to
these,
5
um,
feet wide. They're
seeds are
highly
quite
branched,
similar,
and they do
in,
have
the
swollen
smartweed.
nodes.
But here you've got a
and,
real prominent
the leaves are
ochrea
smooth and
in
pointed,
Pennsylvania smartweed.
and they have a
They
sheath
can
at
get
the
2 to
base
5
that
feet
extends around
wide.
the stem, which
They're
are close to
highly
the
branched,
ochrea.
and they do have swollen nodes, and the leaves are smooth
And by
and
the way, I
pointed.
should mention,
And they
smartweed
have a
is
sheath
named
at the
as such
base
so that
extends
if you
around the
get
stem,
that
which of course is the ochrea.
part of the leaf exudate, it doesn't really have exudate on it, but if you touch smartweed and
by
then
the way,
touch
I
your
should
arm or your
mention,
face,
smartweed
you can
is
definitely
named as such
get
so
a
that if you
smarting
get that
sensation. Part of the leaf exudate.
All right.
It doesn't really
Eastern
have
black
exudate on
nightshade.
it.
Now
but
we're moving
if you
into
touch
the
smartweed
Solanaceae
and then
family.
touch your arm
One
or
of
your
the
face,
big
you can
weed
definitely
problems
get
in
a smarting
soybeans.
sensation.
And it is an annual with a branching growth habit. It's
All right.
in the Solanaceae
Eastern black
family.
nightshade.
Now we're moving into
and
the
that's the
Solanaceae
same
family
that has
one of
peppers,
the
eggplants,
big
potatoes, and
weed
tomatoes.
problems in soybeans.
It is a summer annual.
And
Yeah,
it
we're
is an
talking about
annual
summer
with a
annuals
branching
here.
growth habit.
And
It's in
quite
the
branching.
Solanaceae
Leaves are
family.
alternate.
And fairly
that's the
small
same
family
family
that
that
has
has
peppers,
peppers,
eggplants,
a lot of
potatoes,
times we'll
and
have
tomatoes.
wavy margins.
It is a
and
summer
pointed at
annual
the
yet.
tips
We're
when
talking
they're
about
older
summer
leaves.
annuals here.
And
Quite
flowers are
branching.
born in
Leaves are
clusters.
alternate. And
they're
fairly
gonna
small,
be,
1 to 3
all
inches.
the flowers are typically
A lot
the
of times
same
we'll
type
have
in
wavy
Solanaceae
margins
family.
and pointed at the tips.
They
when they're
have
older
a
leaves.
and
Flowers are
staminate
born in
cone,
clusters,
which all
and
a lot of
they're
times
gonna
the
be,
anthers are
all the
fused,
flowers
and
are
then you
typically
have
the
the
same
same
type
curved
in
Solanaceae
petals that
family.
are can be quite showy.
They have a
and then all the fruits are going to be typically
staminate
berries,
on
which all
these
the a lot of
Solanaceae
times the
family.
anthers are fused, and then you have
Leaves
the
are going to have some
recurved,
purplish tint
petals
to them
that are can
and
be
the
quite
cotyledons
showy.
are gonna be
and then all the
ovate.
fruits are going to be typically berries on these Solanaceae families.
Still in the Solanaceae family, but a
Leaves are gonna
rather
have some
standout.
purplish
It's
tint
going to
to
be
'em.
hard to miss
And
this
the
one.
cotyledons are
Jimson
gonna be
weed
ovate.
has not a berry, but a capsule. Is the
Still in the
large
Solanaceae family, but a
golf ball
rather
size capsule.
standout.
When it
It's
gets
going to
big
be
and
hard
it's all
to miss
spiny.
this one.
And,
Jimson weed
the cotyledons
has
are gonna be
not a
lanceolate
berry,
and
but a
smooth,
capsule.
and the
is
leaves
the,
are going to be typically
large
ovate
golf
or
ball
egg-shaped
size
with
pointed
capsule. When it gets
lobes.
big and it's all
You can
spiny,
see the pointed tip
and
lobes on
the
them.
cotyledons
Okay.
are going to be lanceolate,
And the stems are
and
going to
smooth,
be hollow, purplish,
and
and
the leaves
smooth,
are going to be
which is
typically
typical
ovate
of,
or egg-shaped
smooth
with
part
pointed
of
tipped
Solanaceae.
lobes.
You can
And
see the pointed tipped lobes
can have a
on 'em.
strong foul
Okay.
odor in
And
the
the
leaves.
stems are going to be
It is
hollow,
poisonous,
purplish, and
smooth.
there are a lot of
which is
people that
typical
actually
of,
ingest
at
this
least for
smooth part of Solanaceae.
hallucinatory
and
aspects of it. Can have a strong
Okay.
foul odor in the leaves. It is poisonous.
And then if we
And there
still
are
are
a
in
lot
the
of people that
Solanaceae
actually
family, this
ingest
is
this
not
for
typical of the rest of the
hallucinatory
Solanaceae family.
aspects of
And
it.
again, I put it in here because buffalo burr, sometimes known as Texas sand
And then if
burr,
we still are
is
in the
a,
Solanaceae family, this
definitely
is not
another
typical
plant
of the
weed
rest
that
of the
we had in
Solanaceae
South
family.
Dakota, like the
And again, I
puncture
put it
vine
in
that
here
you don't
because
really usually see too much
buffalo
around here.
burr,
You
sometimes
can
known as
see it,
Texas
but
sand burr,
it is
got
a,
a more fused,
definitely another
flower
plant
than
weed
what
that
you'd
we
see in
had
the
in
rest
South
of the
Dakota, like the puncture
Solanaceae.
vine, that you don't really usually see too
fused or
much around here.
gamopetalous flower.
You can see
highly,
it, but it is
serrated
got a more
or deeply
fused,
lobed,
flower
than
than
what
what
you'd
you'd
see in the rest
on the
of the
stem.
Solanaceae.
Prominent
the
leaf veins,
fused or gamopetalous
stiff,
flower,
straight hairs on the upper
surface,
surface,
serrated
and dense star-shaped hairs
deeply
on the
lobed,
lower
I mean,
surface.
alternately
And then along the
placed
main
leaves
stem,
on the stem, all those spines,
prominent leaf
and
veins,
the flowers and fruit,
stiff,
straight
of course,
hairs on the upper
fruit
surface,
are globe-shaped
and dense
berries
star-shaped
enclosed
hairs
in a
on the lower
spiny
surface.
calyx.
And then along the
So
main
you do have
stem,
a berry yet,
all
but it's
those
got a
spines
spiny calyx around
and
it.
the flowers
Okay.
and fruit.
And,
of course, the fruit are
definitely a
globe-shaped
major,
berries enclosed in a
if you get
spiny
into this, it's
calyx.
not going to be fun for you.
So you do have a berry yet, but it's got a spiny calyx around it. Okay.
Now we move into a different
And,
family,
definitely
the velvet
a
leaf
major
family.
issue if you
And,
get into this.
or
It's
I'm
not going to
sorry,
be fun for
Malvaceae
you.
family. And velvet leaf is a little bit different than some
Now
of
we
the rest
move
of the
into a
Malvaceae
different
family, but we've got a
family,
fair number
the velvet leaf
grouped here
family,
together. And
in
Malvaceae,
I'm sorry,
the
Malvaceae
Malvaceae family,
round
and
or heart-shaped.
velvet leaf is a
Okay.
little bit different
And,
than some of the
leaves
rest
are
of the
very
Malvaceae
large
family, but we've got
and
a fair
heart-shaped,
number,
and they've got
grouped here
like
together.
velvet leaf. They're
in
very
Malvaceae,
pubescent. They're
the
very
cotyledons
small
are
hairs
round,
that is really
or
soft.
heart-shaped,
And
okay?
the flowers are going to
And
be
the
yellow.
leaves are
with
very
5
large
petals,
and
okay?
heart-shaped, and they've
And,
got like
then
velvet
the,
leaf. They're
very pubescent.
fruit
They're
is
very
going to
small
be a
hairs
capsule,
that is really soft.
and sorry, I don't
And
have
the flowers
a
are going to
mature
be
capsule
yellow
here.
with
But
5
as you,
petals.
if you are familiar
Okay.
with dried
And,
dehiscent fruit,
then
the
the,
capsule, once it turns brown,
fruit is
will
going to be
open
a
at
capsule,
the top, and
thousands
sorry,
of
I don't
seeds
have
will come
a
out of the
mature
top of
capsule
this.
here.
Okay.
But if you are familiar with
And
dried
it can
dehiscent
get up
fruit,
to,
the capsule, once
8,
it
10
turns
feet
brown,
tall in
will
certain
open at the
locations.
top
So
and
can
definitely tower
thousands
above
of
the rest
seeds
of the
will come
crop
out
or
of the
the
top
other
of
weeds
this.
that are in the area.
And it can get up to
Here's another one in the
8, 10
Malvaceae
feet
family.
tall in
And
certain
remember, in
locations.
Malvaceae
So
family,
can some
definitely
pretty,
tower above the rest of the
big
crop or the other
differences,
weeds
but
that are in the
sometimes
area.
you'd never expect unless you saw them in flower. Okra.
Here's another one in the
typical warm
Malvaceae
season
family.
vegetable.
And remember,
cotton
in Malvaceae
is
family,
also
some
a mallow,
pretty, and so is
big
cacao.
differences, but sometimes you'd never expect.
So if we
unless you
look
saw
at
'em in
common
flower.
mallow, very
Okra,
distinctive.
the typical
It's
warm season
going to have
vegetable.
long spreading
Our
stalks
cotton
or
is
petioles,
also a mallow,
and
so
going
is
to have
cacao.
an erect central. So if we look at
Stalk,
common
okay.
mallow, very
and
distinctive.
geranium-like
It's,
leaves. So if
going
you
to have
ever
long
look at the
spreading
bedding plant,
stalks
geranium
or
definitely
petioles,
looks just
and
almost like
going
it.
to have an erect
Only quite a
central,
bit smaller leaf than geranium.
stalk.
Okay.
And
And
so if we look at the
geranium-like
stems,
leaves,
so
are
if
gonna be
you ever
partly
look at the
erect
bedding
to
plant,
decumbent,
geranium
depending
definitely
on,
looks
the
just
almost
growing
like
situation.
Only quite a
Stems
bit
are covered
smaller
with
leaf
hairs,
than geranium.
and flowers are going to be.
so if we look at the
typically
stems,
have
they're gonna
5
be
white
partly
to purple
erect
tinged
to
petals,
decumbent,
depending
which
on
notched
the
tips on the
growing
petals.
situation.
Okay.
Stems are covered with
Fruit are
hairs,
going to be flat, round
and
capsules.
flowers are
Okay,
going
just
to
like
be
what we saw
typically
in,
have 5 white
the
to purple tinged petals,
velvet.
which notched tips on the
Okay.
petals.
Okay.
Fruit are going to
Then,
be flat, round
We're
capsules.
going to have
Okay, just
another
like what we saw
Malvaceae
in,
here. The common
the
mallow was this, but now we go
velvet.
into the Venice mallow, and that's really coming up showy, like you would be with
Then,
okra. We're going to have
And, cotton.
another
Cotton can be have some pretty
Malvaceae
showy
here. The
flowers,
common
too.
mallow was this, but now we go to
So
the
Venice
Venice
mallow
mallow, and that's
has
really
a more
coming
showy
up
flower.
like you
If you
would
look
be
at
with
the,
okra.
leaves,
and,
they're going to be
cotton-
alternate
cotton
again
can
and
be- have some
divided
pretty showy
into
flowers too.
at least 3 distinct segments.
So Venice
just one
mallow
segment on the
has a
first
more
true leaf
showy
here,
flower,
but
if
as
you
they
look
get
at
bigger,
the,
you can have a lot of segments.
leaves, they're going to
up
be
7
alternate again and
lobes
divided, and
into at least
leaves
3
are going to be
distinct
coarsely
segments.
toothed margins.
Here's just one
So if you look
segment
at
on
that,
the first
there's a lot
true
of
leaf
very
here,
big,
but
as they
teeth
get
on those
bigger, you can have a
margins.
lot of segments.
Okay. Up to
And,
7 lobes
long
each,
petioles are up to
and
3 inches long.
leaves are going to be
So there you
coarsely
go with
toothed
the long
margins.
petioles.
So if you look at that, there's
Okay.
a lot of very big teeth on those margins.
Flowers and fruit.
Okay,
They're going to
and
have
long
five
petioles
creamy
are
white
up to
petals
3 inches long
with a purple
So
blotch
there
at
you
the
go with
base,
the long
and often have
petioles.
purple
Okay.
margins. And again, you
Flowers
have round
and
hairy
fruit.
capsules enclosed.
They're going to
in
have
sacs. five
Here's the
creamy
Venice
white
mallow
petals
with the
with a purple
membranous
blotch
sacs.
at the base, and often have purple margins. And again,
Now
you
we
have
go
round hairy
to
capsules
our only
enclosed
one
in
that I've got in
sacs.
this segment
Here's the Venice
with the
mallow
parasitic
with the
weeds, and
membranous
this
sacs.
particular parasitic weed you might not expect to be in the Convolvulaceae family.
Now we
which is
go
the same
to
thing as what
our
we see
only
with
one
field
that I've
vine
got in
weed.
this segment,
And this is
with the
dodder.
parasitic
We've
weeds,
been
and this
exposed to that in lecture
particular
before.
parasitic weed
And
you might
it
not
is highly
expect to be in the
parasitic,
Convolvulaceae
and it is a
family,
higher level
which
plant,
is the same
just like
thing
all
as what we
these
see with field vine
angiosperms
weed
that we've been talking
and
about.
this is dodder,
and
we've been
we
exposed
can
to
see
that in
them
lecture before,
all over,
and
the
it
United
is highly
States, basically.
parasitic. And
Plants
it
are
is
gonna
a
start from
higher
seeds
level
each year,
plant,
but
just
in a
like
few
all
days,
these
the seedlings attach
angiosperms
themselves
that
to
we've
a
been talking
host
about,
plant
and
start to
we
extract
can see
the
them
water and
all
nutrients.
over.
All
The
their
United
water
States,
and food
basically.
is going to come from
Plants are going to
their
start
host
from
plant.
seeds each year, but in a few
And
days
they can
seedlings
get
attach
very
themselves
vigorous
to a host plant
and
start
cover a
to
lot of
extract,
territory.
the water
One
and
plant
nutrients.
can actually
all their
cover,
water and food is
um,
going to come from
of
their
dodder
host
can
plant.
cover like many
And,
other
they
plants.
can get
And
very
here it is,
vigorous
it looks like it's attacking
and
puncture
cover a
vines,
lot of
possibly.
territory. One plant can actually cover
of dodder
and
can
then if
cover
we go
like
into
many
the
other
goosefoot
plants.
family,
And here it is. It looks like
Kochia,
it's attacking,
otherwise
puncture
known as
vine,
fireweed.
possibly.
We don't see a lot of it around here, but again, if you go out into the Dakotas, we had a lot
And
of
then if we
problems
go
with
into
fireweed
the,
or
Kochia,
goosefoot family.
And again,
Kochia,
just so you're aware
otherwise
of the
known as
allergic
fireweed,
reaction,
we don't
that
see a
pollen
lot of it
from
around here,
fireweed
but
can
again,
be
if you
just
go
as
out into the
toxic
Dakotas,
or allergenic
we had a
as it
lot
can
of
be
problems
from
with
ragweed.
fireweed or
Believe me,
kochia.
it's a bad
and
one when it's in
again,
pollen,
just so you're aware of the
releasing
allergic
pollen.
reaction, that pollen
If
from
you look at
fireweed
the,
can be just as
seedlings,
toxic or
they're gonna be,
allergenic
quite
as
hairy.
it can be from
Okay.
ragweed. And
Believe me, it's a bad
this
one when
does
it's
get
in
to be
pollen,
quite erect and quite large.
releasing
They can
pollen.
be up to 7 feet tall.
If you look
You
at
know, we
the,
had some
seedlings,
7-footers even on our sandy
they're going to be
soils.
quite hairy.
Stems are smooth and
Okay.
green. They branch
And,
profusely.
this does
And
get
the
to be
seedlings,
quite
like I said,
erect
are
and
highly
quite
pubescent.
large. They can be
Leaves
up
are
to
gonna be
7 feet
alternate
tall.
small
And
I know we
pointed.
had some 7-footers
and
even
1
on
to
our
2 inches
sandy
long.
soils.
And attached
Stems are
directly
smooth
to the
and
stems,
green.
so there's
They
really
branch
no petiole
profusely.
involved.
And seedlings, like I said, are highly pubescent.
And they
Leaves are
do
gonna be
germinate
alternate,
very
small and
early in
pointed,
the spring, but late
and
in
1 to 2
maturity.
inches long.
And they do turn
and attached
bright
directly
red
to the
most of
stems,
the time
so
in the
there's really
fall.
no petiole
That's
involved.
why it's called the burning bush, is because of its red color.
And they
not
do
because of
germinate
its
very
allergenic,
early in the spring,
potential.
but late in maturity. And they do turn bright red most of the time in the fall. That's why it's
And then
called
if
the
we
burning
move on,
bush,
we're
is
still
because
in
of
the
its red
goosefoot
color,
family,
not
Chenopodiaceae.
because of its
And
allergenic
if we look at Russian
potential.
thistle, again, not so common around here, but you can see how closely the seeds resemble.
And then if we move
the,
on, we're
kochia.
still in the goosefoot
Russian
family,
thistle
Chenopodiaceae,
is, can get
and if
very
we look at
large and
Russian
multiple
thistle,
branched. I've
again,
mentioned it
not
in
so
lecture,
common around here,
again, as
but
one of our
you
major
can see how
weeds in South
closely the
Dakota,
seeds resemble
and it's a
the
bushy, spiny
kochia.
annual. Here's
Russian
the
thistle
spininess
is
that you can see.
can get very
Stems
large
are
and
tough and
multiple
often
branched.
reddish,
I've mentioned it in
forming
lecture.
a ball-like
again,
tumbleweed
as one of our major
at
weeds
maturity.
in South Dakota.
Okay.
And it's a bushy,
And,
spiny annual.
young
Here's
plants
the
are soft and
spininess
succulent
that you can see. And
Stems are
leaves
tough
are
and often
all-shaped
reddish
and soft
following
when
a
young.
ball-like
And,
tumbleweed.
they become
maturity.
sharper
Okay.
and more pointed as they get older.
And young plants are soft and
Blooms in
succulent.
July. and
leaves
then,
are all
when it
shaped
matures
and soft when
in
young.
the late part of the
and,
growing
they
season,
become
then it
sharper
detaches
and more
can
pointed as they
move
get
all
older.
over the place. But if you look at the
Seedling
in
July,
Russian thistle,
and
then
when
kochia,
it matures,
boy, do they ever
in
look
the
similar,
late
don't they?
part of the growing
Season, then it detaches and can move all over the place. But if
Then
you look at the
one of the more
seedling
popular
Russian
and more
thistle
common weeds in the
and
Chaetopodaceae
kochia
family is
boy, do
lamb's
they ever
quarter.
look similar, don't
And
they?
this is common
Okay.
all over the place, and this is a very good picture of a fairly young seedling.
Then
one of the more popular and more
stems are
common
gonna be
weeds
branching.
in the Chaetopodaceae
They can get 1 to 4
family is
feet
lamb's
high
quarter.
or more.
And this
They're
is
smooth and
common
light
all
green
over
with
the place,
grayish
and this is a very
blotches.
good picture
And
of a fairly
they have
young
a mealy
seedling.
coated
The
coating on the underside of
stems
the
are going to be
leaves,
branching.
which I had a picture
They
of that.
can get 1 to 4
Flowers
feet
are going
high
to be
or
small
more.
and green.
They're
in
smooth
irregular
and light green with
clusters.
grayish blotches.
And
very common.
They have a mealy
weed,
coated,
one of the most common
coating
weeds
on the
ever.
underside of the leaves. Wish I had a picture of that. Flowers are going to be small and green in
Now we
irregular
move into that
clusters.
troublesome
And,
group, the
very
Amaranthaceae,
common weed, one of the
and
most common
all the
weeds
different
ever.
types of pigweed, and many of them are edible to some degree.
Now
at
we
certain
move into
stages,
that
whether it be
troublesome
seeds or
group,
as young
the
leaves or plants.
Amaranthaceae.
Not all, and
But
all the different
again,
types of
wanted
pigweed.
to stress how much the
And,
Native Americans actually
many of them
used
are
various
edible
types of
to some
pigweed
degree at certain
as a
stages,
food
whether it be
source,
seeds or as
especially
young
even
leaves or
Palmer-
plants.
Palmer
Not
amaranth.
all, but
So
again,
this particular
wanted to stress how
amaranth, the
much the
cotyledons
Native
are gonna be
Americans
linear,
actually used
okay,
various types of pigweed,
and they're going
as
to be
a food
prominent
source.
mid-vein,
especially even
Palmer.
Palmer
Usually have a
amaranth.
small notch at the
So
tip.
this particular
And, you
amaranth, the
can't see it
cotyledons
very
are going to be
easily
linear
in these
okay?
pictures,
and
but
they're going to be
usually they do
prominent
have a
vi-
notch at the
mid-vein.
tip. If we had a
right
little
here.
bit clearer photograph,
Usually have a
here.
small notch
And,
at the tip.
Like I said, leaves
And,
are alternate.
you can't
leaf
see it
surfaces
very
are
easily
rough as they
in
get
these
older,
pictures,
with hairs
but,
on the underside.
usually they do have a
And
notch
most
at the
notably
tip
on the
if
vein.
we had a little bit clearer photograph.
Leaf margins
here.
are entire
And,
to wavy.
like I said, leaves are
So here
alternate.
you can see a
The
little
leaf
bit of
surfaces are
waviness on
rough
the
as
leaf
they
margins,
get older,
with hairs on the
and,
underside.
petioles are up to
And
1/2
most
inch
notably
long.
on the veins.
Okay.
And
Leaf
in this
margins
case with
are
redwood
entire
pigweed,
to
you're gonna
wavy.
have
So
the
here you can see a little bit of waviness on the leaf
being
margins.
So you got a
And,
red stem.
petioles are up to 1/2 inch long.
And then if you
Okay.
look at the
And in this
actual
case with
seed
redwood
head,
pigweed, you're going to
this
have
is actually
the
a
inflorescence.
hypocotyl
It's going to be
as,
quite compact
being
in
red.
redwood pigweed.
so you got a red stem.
The
there.
spikes are 8 inches long.
then if you
and
look
flowers
at
have
the,
bracts about twice as
actual
long as
seed
the
head,
sepals.
this is actually our inflorescence.
It's going to be quite compact.
So
in
then to
redwood
smooth pigweed, we're not going to go
The,
into any
spikes are
details,
8
but if you look
inches
at
long,
that
and
compared
flowers have
to
bracts about
the
twice as long as the sepals.
smooth pigweed compared to redwood pigweed, you've got
So then
the
to smooth
lanceolate,
pigweed,
cotyledons
we're not
again,
going to go into any
roundish
details, but if
cotyledon
you
with
look
a little
at that
notch
compared to
right in the first
the
true leaf,
and then you've got
smooth
wavy
pigweed
margins
compared to
again,
redwood
but the smooth
pigweed,
pigweed,
you've
got
spike
the
is
lanceolate
going to be
cotyledons
a little bit
again,
less compact,
roundish
than,
cotyledon with a
what you
little
see
notch
with redwood
right in
pigweed.
the first true leaf.
And I think I'll show you a
and
picture
then you've
here
got
later
wavy
on
margins
comparing
again,
all
but the
the
smooth pigweed
inflorescences.
spike is going to
Then
be
if we go into
a little bit
spiny
less
amaranth,
compact.
There's
than, what you see
definitely
with redwood
a
pigweed.
more loose
And I
and
think I'll show you a
open,
picture here later on,
inflorescence,
comparing all
and
the
it does have some
inflorescences.
spininess on the stems and
Then if we go
parts
into
of the leaves.
spiny
So
amaranth,
you can see
there's
even little spines
definitely
coming out
a
on,
more loose
this
and
particular
open
specimen that's not very
inflorescence,
old,
and it does have
So,
some spininess on
definitely
the stems
one that you
and,
can
parts of the
feel
leaves.
that
So
damage from the
you can
spines
see
with
even
spiny
little
amaranth.
spines coming out on this particular specimen. That's
Then
not
there is
very
a tumble
old.
pigweed,
So, and
definitely
that's
one
still
that
in
you
the
can,
Amaranthaceae.
feel that
and,
damage from the spines. with
Usually
spiny
soft
amaranth.
all around stems and succulent,
and
then there is a
smaller
tumble
leaves,
pigweed,
and definitely will
that's
detach
still
almost
in
like
the
Russian
Amaranthaceae,
thistle will.
and
When it gets older and
usually
mature,
soft,
it'll
all
break off
around,
at the tip and
stems
go rolling
and succulent.
around. So
And
you have
smaller
tumbleweed,
leaves,
and
tumble
definitely
pigweed
will
and
detach
tumbleweed
almost like Russian
itself,
thistle will.
that
When it gets
you
older
look
and
at,
mature,
as
it'll
Russian
break
thistle.
off at the tip and go rolling around. So you have tumbleweed, tumble pigweed, and tumbleweed
prostrate
itself.
pigweed.
Again,
that,
very
you look
interesting
at,
that we have a
as
more
Russian
prostrate growing pigweed, but it does have a lot of the same characteristics of all the rest of the pigweeds. Only
prostrate
very
pigweed,
noticeable.
again,
Very
prostrate,
interesting
growth
that we
habit.
have a more prostrate
smaller
growing
leaves typically.
pigweed, but it does have a lot
Nonetheless,
of the
can be
same
quite
characteristics of all the rest of the pigweeds. Only
And then
very
one that
noticeable
you may not have
prostrate,
thought of as
growth
being in the
habit.
Amarantaceae
And
family
smaller
would be
leaves
water
typically.
hemp.
And
Nonetheless,
it is
can
going
be
to
quite
be
invasive.
more in moist locations.
And then
it looks
one
almost a little
that
bit like
you
curly
may not
dock
have
in its
thought of as being
inflorescence.
in the Amarantaceae
And,
family
It
would be
is going
water
to be
hemp.
up to 8
And,
feet tall. It is going to
and
be
alternate
more in
lancelet to
moist
ovate,
locations.
lancelet
It looks
leaves.
almost a little bit like
And so
curly
they're
dock
gonna be a
in
lot,
its inflorescence.
typically
And,
quite a bit more
narrow
than
is
what
going
you
to
see
be
in the rest of
up
the
to 8
Amarantaceae
feet tall.
family.
And
Alternate lancelet to ovate,
and they're going to be
lancelet
frequently
leaves.
notched, and so they're going to
And,
be a lot.
they have a shiny
typically
upper surface,
quite a bit more narrow,
entire
than
leaf
what you see in the
margins,
rest of the Amarantaceae.
and the petioles are
going to be
family.
longer than
Okay.
a lot of the other,
And,
they're going to be
Amarantaceae.
frequently notched. And they have a
The
shiny
inflorescence
upper
may
surface, developed directly
entire
from upper
leaf
branches
margins,
or upper leaf, and the
axis.
petioles are going to be longer than a lot of
This
the
is
other
common water hemp.
Amarantaceae. The inflorescence may
Palmer
develop
amaranth.
directly from
Probably
upper
one of the
branches
worst
or upper
weeds of
leaf
all.
axis. Very difficult to tell from
So this is
quite
common water
some of
hemp.
the other Amarantaceae, except for the inflorescences are very
then
open.
Palmer
It's a very
amaranth.
aggressive
Probably one of
weed.
the worst
Thus
weeds of
it-
all.
and it reproduces
Very
at a
difficult
very
to,
heavy rate.
tell from,
Thus, it's
quite
probably
a-
the
some
worst
of the other
of any of the
Amarantaceae,
Amarantaceae,
for
except for the
invasive,
inflorescences are
potential.
very open. It's a very aggressive weed,
Wavy
Thus
margins,
and it
going
reproduces
to have
at a
very
very
distinct
heavy rate.
venation,
Thus, it's
at
probably
least prominent
the worst
venation,
of
I
any of
should
the
say.
amaranth for invasive
And then,
potential.
of
course, there's all kinds of biotypes out there, as you might guess,
Wavy
in any of these
margins,
weeds, but
going
we
to
really
have very
notice it in
distinct
Palmer
venation,
amaranth with the
at least
reddish
prominent
types
venation, I should
and
say.
all different variations out there.
And then,
of
these
course,
are
there's all
actually,
kinds of
three
biotypes
different
out there, as you
variants
might
right
guess,
here
in
that
any of
look
these
somewhat
weeds,
different
but
from
we
each
really
other.
notice it
And they
in
can
Palmer
get
amaranth
to
with
be
the
a very
reddish
large,
types
weed.
and all different variations
And
out
as we
there.
know, it's got a
these
lot
are
of
actually
resistance
three
to,
different
various
variants right here
herbicides,
that look
including
somewhat
glyphosate.
different from each other, and they can get to be a very large weed. And then if we look at
And
the
as
differences
we know, it's
between
got a lot of
here's two
resistance
different types
to,
of Palmer
various
amaranth.
herbicides,
Here's a
including
red
glyphosate.
root pigweed right here, and water hemp with a lot narrower leaf. If you look over
And then if
here,
we
here's
look at
water
the
hemp with that
differences
narrow
between,
leaf and
here's
red root
two different
pigweed
types
with a
of
much
Palmer
wider leaf.
amaranth.
And then if
Here's
you look
a
at
red
the
root
inflorescences,
pigweed right here.
the Palmer
and
has
water
a
hemp
lot
with a
more
lot
narrower
loose,
leaf.
open.
If you look over
uh,
here, here's water hemp with
branching
that narrow
inflorescence,
leaf, and red root
whereas
pigweed with
red
a much
root
wider leaf
has a
and then if you
very
look at the
tight one,
inflorescences,
as does smooth,
the Palmer
and
has
then
a
water
lot
hemp
more
has a little bit more
loose,
open,
feathery one compared
branching
to
Palmer.
inflorescence, whereas red root has a very
And
tight
then
one,
we'll go on to
as does
winter
smooth,
annuals.
and then water hemp
And
has a little bit more
there
open,
are
feather,
a fair
feathery
number
one
of winter
compared to,
annuals, just
Palmer.
like summer annuals. And remember, they're going to typically
And,
germinate
then we'll
in
go
the,
on to
late summer
winter
to fall.
annuals.
And
then
there
we'll
are
overwinter,
a fair
typically
number
as
of
a
winter
rosette
annuals,
pattern,
just like summer
and then in
annuals.
the,
and they're
remember, they're
spring,
going
they'll
to
start
typically
to bolt,
germinate
they've been,
in the
fertilized,
late
and then
summer
they'll
to
complete
fall,
their life cycle
and
by
then we'll
the
overwinter,
late spring, early
typically
summer.
as a rosette pattern, and then in the early
Shepherd's
spring, they'll
purse is
start
one
to
of the most
bolt.
common.
They've been
This is in the
vernalized, and then
Brassicaceae
they'll
family.
complete their life
It is
cycle
a winter annual,
by
sometimes
the
a
late spring,
biennial.
early summer.
I've seen it as a biennial, and it's my worst weed right now. In my
Shepherd's
strawberry
purse is
field.
one of the most common,
At
this
least
is
in the one that has
Brassicaceae
the
family.
recently
It is a
planted
winter
seedlings in
annual,
it.
sometimes
Found
a
in a lot of
biennial.
cultivated areas,
I've seen it
field
as a
lawn
biennial,
gardens,
and it's my
roadsides,
worst weed right now.
And when
in
my
soil
strawberry
temperatures
field.
go below 60 degrees,
At least in the
then
one
it
that
starts
has
to germinate.
the recently planted
and
seedlings in it.
flowering period
Found in a
is
lot of
March to
cultivated
November,
areas,
depending
field,
on the
lawn,
type. But
gardens,
around
roadsides,
here, most of them
and,
are
when
going to
sen-
be
soil
in
temperatures
the
go
spring,
below
and they
60
get done
degrees
pretty early.
then
in
it
the
starts
spring
to germinate.
when they start to and
bolt
flowering
and produce
period
that,
is March to November,
inflorescence.
depending on the type.
And
But
just like
around
most of the
here,
Brassicaceae,
most of them are
you're
going
gonna
to
see,
be in the spring.
a
and they
large
get done pretty
inflorescence
early in the
that's
spring,
fairly showy
when they
for
start
its size,
and it is a
produce that,
raceme,
inflorescence,
unbranched to slightly
just like most
branched,
of the Brassicaceae,
and the leaves are going to
you're
be
gonna see
alternate
and
a
deeply,
large
pinnately
inflorescence
lobed,
that's fairly showy
and,
for its
smaller
size,
apically
and
than
it is
basally,
a raceme,
basally, okay.
unbranched to slightly
grows 6 to
branched,
18 inches tall,
and the leaves are going to be
typically white
alternate,
flowers,
and
and
then the
deeply,
fruits are going to be
pinnately
a
lobed,
triangular
and,
or
smaller
heart-shaped.
apically than basally,
And
basally.
cotyledons
Okay.
are round or
To grow 6 to
spatulate in
18
shape,
inches tall,
and
typically white
maybe
flowers,
slightly indented
and
at
then
the
the
tips.
fruits are going to be
So
a
very
triangular
common
or heart-shaped.
winter annual.
Okay.
And
Rosette
cotyledons
leaves
are
are
going to
round
be
or spatulate in shape,
star-like branched
and
hairs on upper
maybe slightly
surface.
indented at
Leaf
the tips.
lobes are point
So
to the leaf
very
tip.
common
Winter annual. Rosette leaves are going to be
Next one on the list
branched
is going to
hairs
be
on upper
tansy
surface.
mustard.
Leaf lobes
Still in the
are point to the
Brassicaceae
leaf
tip.
family, which was
Okay.
originally the Cruciferae family. And it is another winter annual found in
Next one on
rangeland
the list
roadsides
is
and
going to be
fields.
tansy
And,
mustard.
Still in the
Distinguishing
Brassicaceae
features are gonna
family,
be
which
leaves
was
are
originally
segmented
the
in
Cruciferae
a very
family.
narrow fern-like
And
pattern.
it is another
Plants
winter
are,
annual found
up
in
to 3 feet
rangeland
tall,
roadsides and
with
fields.
simple branched
And,
stems.
flowers are going to be
Distinguishing,
bright
features
yellow,
are going to be
and
leaves
fruits
are going to be a
segmented
silique
in a very
typical
narrow
of the
fern-like
Brassicaceae
pattern.
family.
Plants
And with
are
a silique,
up to 3 feet
it's
tall.
a bivalve,
with
so
simple
that when
branched
these
stems,
open up,
flowers are going to be
these
bright
yellow
are going
and fruits
to
are going to be a
have
silique,
the
typical
two
of the
sides
Brassicaceae family.
open
And
up,
with the silique,
and then the middle
it's
is
a
going to be the
bivalve,
central
so that
axis
when
is going to
these
be
open
where the
up,
seeds are. So
these
the two halves
are
are
going
going
to
to
open up here
have
and here,
the two
and then you're going to have
sides
a central axis with the seeds
open up,
attached
and then
to
the
that
middle
little
is
central
going to
axis.
be the central axis is going to be where the
So
seeds
leaves are
are.
alternate,
so
light
the two
green,
halves
2 or 3
are going
times
to be open
pinnately
up
divided,
here
and
giving
here,
a that
and then you're
lacy
going to have a
appearance,
central axis with the seeds
and
attached
stems
to
are
that
going to
little
be
central
rectangle to
axis.
many branched and
Okay.
densely hairy.
So leaves are alternate,
Okay.
light green, 2 or 3 times pinnately divided, giving a that lacy appearance. Pennycress,
And,
still in the Brassicaceae
stems are going to be
family.
rectangle to many
Again,
branched and densely hairy.
Inflorescence going to be
Okay.
very typical, and most of the Brassicaceae are going to have alkaloids.
Field
Some will have a
pennycress,
waxy
still in the
appearance or a
Brassicaceae
waxy
family.
covering or cutin
Again,
on their leaves. Others Inflorescence
don't.
going to
This
be
particular
very
winter
typical,
annual
and
is gonna be,
most of the
have
Brassicaceae
a,
are going to have
chemical that
alkaloids.
cause gastric
Some will have
distress
a
in
waxy
livestock,
appearance or a waxy
and,
covering or cutin
they
on
can
their
have,
leaves. Others don't.
bitter
This
cows
particular
that
winter
consume the
annual
seeds of
is going
pennycress
to
may
be
produce
milk with a bitter
have
garlic
a
flavor
chemical
and odor.
that cause gastric distress
Plant
in
stem is
livestock.
erect or
and,
simple, and
they can have
range from 1
bitter,
to 2.5 feet
cows
tall.
that consume the
Alternate,
seeds of pennycress may
arrangement
produce
of
milk with a
leaves,
bitter garlic
and,
flavor and odor.
The leaves are going to clasp
Plant stem
the
is
stem,
erect or and
they
simple,
do form a
and,
basal
range
rosette
from
like you
1
would
to
expect
2.5
with
feet
a
tall,
winter annual.
alternate
And that's how it
arrangement of
overwinters,
leaves,
and then the next spring
and,
they'll be vernalized.
The leaves are going to
and,
clasp
send
the
up a
stem.
flowering stalk. They do form a lower
Basal
leaves are going to
rosette
be
like you would expect with a
entire
winter
or
annual,
coarsely toothed
and that's how it
margins with
overwinters.
blunt
And
tips.
then the next spring
Okay.
they'll be vernalized,
And fruits are
and,
going to be
send
flat,
up a
circular,
flowering
or
stalk.
rounded to oblong.
Lower leaves are going to be entire or coarsely toothed margins with blunt tips.
This
Okay.
is where I'm going to
And,
stop
fruits
lab.
are
I
gonna be
know
flat,
lab should
circular,
be
or
about
rounded
2
to
hours, but
oblong.
with
With all this material and all the detail, I know for studying as a student and for me going over it as an
This is
instructor,
where I'm going
this is
to
about all we
stop
can
lab.
handle.
I know
for one
lab
lab
should be about 2
so,
hours,
This is
but
where
with all
we'll
this
stop
material
for this week's
and
lab.
all
all the detail. I know for studying as a student and for me going over it as an instructor, this is about all we can handle for one lab. So this is where we'll stop for this week's lab.